Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Fireside Chat. Today, I am delighted to welcome Bernard. He heads the demographic company which provides specialist advice on demographic, consumer and social trends for business. And today, we'll be discussing work practices and consumer behaviour created by the coronavirus. So before we get into all of that, a little bit about you. So tell us a little bit about what you wanted to do and be when you grew up, and how did you end up doing what you're doing today? Because your portfolio is quite extensive.
Well, this is the Bernard Salt story, I suppose. Well, I'm a baby boomer, born in the mid to late 50s, and so grew up in the 1960s in a small town in Western Victoria. I've written about this in the Australian newspaper. Housing Commission background, big warm family, and didn't feel that I was deprived at all, but it was a very, very working class background. And my big thing, the best thing I thought I could be growing up in this small town was to be a school teacher. So I wanted to be a school teacher, and I went through all the training to be a history and geography school teacher. But then I got to the classroom and all these kids were not as enthusiastic about my subject as I was. And I thought, I'll take the coward's way out. I will go back to university, do another degree, and then fell into consulting, and then fell into writing in trade magazines, then newspapers, and then someone asked me to speak, and it just came so naturally.
Fantastic. And so sort of throughout your career, have there been any sort of real pivotal moments for you in terms of, you know, okay, you got into the school and you realised that the kids were not aligned to you.
That's
so
right.
That's obviously...
That was a great awakening. It's a very rude awakening at the time.
A really serious pivotal moment. Any other sort of pivotal moments, like you were doing consulting and now you're running your own company. So just how did all that happen?
Well, I moved into management consulting. So I was doing property market research based around demographics in the 1990s, expert witness work as well. And then someone asked me, could I speak at an event? And it was some sort of property event in Coffs Harbour. And I thought, how exotic is this? Free trip to Coffs Harbour. And I thought this was just absolutely fantastic. And then someone else asked me to do it, and then someone else. And I thought, oh, this is all very interesting, but it's not the main game. And then I realised, actually, I can turn this into the main game. And then decided what I needed was a book, and produced The Big Shift, talking about the sea change shift in Australia, 2001. And then it just took off like a rocket with that, in fact. So, yes, I've been speaking since 2001. My very first event was the day before 9/11. So I always think, well, that really changed the world, and it changed my life as well. From that moment on, I've been speaking professionally throughout Australia and beyond.
Yeah, very pivotal.
It is, yes.
Yeah, okay. And so, you know, maybe pre-corona and now, what does your day look like now? We were talking before about how busy we are. Like we've never been busier, but it's such a different busy.
Well, I'm absolutely flat out, as is my entire team, but not earning as much revenue as previously, but we're certainly working on reinventing new research, new slides, new narratives. I've certainly upped the amount of writing for the Australian newspaper, so doing 3 pieces a week, and each one of those really does require research, metrics. It's not just a, you know, sort of an idea. You need ideas plus numbers and so forth. That seems to be my market. And then, of course, learning about technology. I talk about the rise of the home office broadcast opportunity, H-O-B-O, hobo, the hobo effect in the home. So my study is now a little mini television studio, and running webinars, of course, now. So I think that's an important development, that a new skill that many people, certainly in this space, have learnt over the last month or so. Yeah,
very much so. I think I don't think you can get cameras or anything at Officeworks anymore. I think, you know, everybody's just been inundated.
Well, this is another thing. I think I had probably bought 1 or 2 things online prior to the coronavirus arriving. I'm buying stuff every day. I'm their best customer. This precise thing you can get delivered to your door. You don't have to go and find a park.
No.
I think this is terrific.
It's a whole new world.
It is a whole new world. It's a little bit addictive. I have to tone it down, I can see.
Very good. So just in terms of, the virus and timelines, and what should business be doing to mitigate risk? Because this will no doubt happen again in some form.
Well, there is no doubt that when you think about disasters or risks that businesses must deal with, it was climate risk, of course, and even issues around supply chain, maybe military disconnection or something like that.
Yep.
I don't think anyone had really thought, what's the probability of a global pandemic that would close down the Western world and beyond in a matter of a month? Yep. In fact, and yet that's exactly what has happened.
And I think, just before you go, I think we've got a slide to actually talk to in terms of the virus timeline. There we go.
This is one of my slides where I show that the last major global pandemic was 1919.
Yep.
There was no air travel, effectively, no commercial air travel. Whereas 100 years later, there are 37 billion flights taken throughout the world. And when you think about that, 37 billion flights, if there is a pandemic or an outbreak or an epidemic in some area, it can get to the rest of the world within a matter of weeks. And that is precisely what's happened. Now, I think with the coronavirus, we're going to manage that, particularly in Australia. But it raises the question, well, what of a more lethal virus sitting out there in 2028 or 2035? What should we be doing right now? And this, I think, is part of the discussions that corporate Australia needs to have. What are the risk mitigation strategies?
Yep.
And so you've got a climate strategy. You need a pandemic strategy going forward. I think we also need to be talking about issues like supply chain sovereignty.
Right.
Like we've got one small factory in Shepparton manufacturing face masks.
Yeah.
What do they cost, like $2 or something?
Yeah.
And they can produce about 2 million, been producing 2 million a year.
Yeah.
We need 100 million for 25 million people, and probably more than that.
Yeah.
So this idea of supply chain sovereignty in medical equipment, masks, PPE, is that personal protection equipment, and a whole range of other pharmaceutical products, supplies in terms of fuel, oil supplies on the Australian continent. It has changed our thinking about what we need inside the life raft of Australia to enable us to withstand a shock like this that will most likely come at some point in the millennial working life.
Yeah. So do you see this as an opportunity as well for Australia, to sort of reset and, come out the other side, but, reposition ourselves moving forward?
I do. In fact, when you look at the last major calamities in Australia or in the world, at a global level, like the First World War and the Second World War, the periods immediately following that has been a period of extreme optimism and happiness. After the First World War and the Spanish flu, there were crazy dances like the Charleston jazz had its, and there was the suffragette movement.
Right.
It was quite a libertarian environment. If you've had 5 years of war and lockdown, then you want to sing it to the world.
Yep.
The same thing happened in the 1950s with a sunny optimism and an entrepreneurialism. And people look to Australia as it's safe, it's secure, it's hygienic, it has resources, has a positive attitude. I think that we can sell Australia's, how we have come through the coronavirus, I think we can sell that at a global level. Come to Australia, invest in Australia, be part of the rebuilding of a better Australia, a fairer Australia, a more considered Australia that aligns with the way and the opportunities of the 21st century. They are the discussions we need to be having right now.
Yeah, okay. And do you think we will?
I most certainly do. In fact, I've put a couple of columns along this line out there. And Australians are incredibly patriotic.
Yeah, they are.
They sort of look at Americans and say, oh, they're a bit over the top. But you scratch an Australian, and they are thinking, we want to create a better society.
Yeah.
And that applies whether you're a 20-something millennial or you're a 60-something baby boomer. I think we're incredibly proud of Australia, what we've created and what we can create in the future. I will say that I was not entirely confident going into the coronavirus that we would comply with social distancing, because we're a bit antsy, aren't we?
We don't like to be told.
Don't like to be told. We don't respond well to authority.
Yep.
And when we saw the pictures of like Bondi and then the hoarding, of course, and think, oh, this is not looking good. But we shifted, we changed.
Yep.
We galvanised as a nation. We saw what we needed to do. And there is a remarkable unity about Australia today. How can we harvest that? How can we harness that to create this vision of a better, stronger Australia? That's the story for the next 6 months, I think.
Yeah, okay. And then sort of following on from that, how do you think customers will actually interact with businesses moving forward? You know, like, you talked before about, your online shopping obsession all of a sudden, and, what do you think will happen from a consumer perspective, even like from a retail perspective and everything that's going on?
Well, I think that consumer values are shifting remarkably over the last 4 months or so. And I think it started in January with the terrible bushfires. And all of a sudden we have get it every year, I suppose, this remarkable admiration for the volunteer firefighters, their bravery, their commitment to service. And you think, oh, that's wonderful, that's a great quality, and we see it every year. And then comes the corona virus, and we see the contribution made by healthcare workers and essential workers, like a supermarket shelf filler. Suddenly moves from someone that has no visibility at all to someone that is respected and thanked. I see news reports of these people saying, well, I've got people coming up and thanking me for doing my job. It's almost like our values are shifted, that we're looking at people who make a contribution to society, and we're shifting to valuing essential workers more. And I'm putting out there the sort of out there idea that, is this the end of narcissism?
I was just about to ask you that question.
Is this the end of celebrities and influencers? You know what? There was a couple of examples of celebrities and influencers trying to garner attention early on, and they were shut down almost immediately. We might be moving into the era of valuing people for the actual contribution that they make. That surely is a better Australia on the other side of the coronavirus.
I would totally agree with you there. What do you think that customers will really value coming out the other side? What will consumers really value? Earlier this week we spoke to Holly Ransom, and one of the things that she said was that people will remember how they made you feel.
Oh yes, well I most certainly do think that. I think that that businesses stepping up and making a contribution. I remember when I first saw, for example, some of the fashion houses in Italy and France moving from making haute couture to face masks, or the breweries and distilleries in Australia pivoting to a hand sanitizer. And you think, oh, isn't that a terrific contribution? Or even the financial institutions making concessions. And you think, oh, at a time of need, to actually step up, step forward, make concessions, identify with people's pain and worry, and find a solution. I think that really sticks. The time to win customers, I think, is not necessarily in the good times, but it's when their backs are against the wall. I think that Australians in particular respond well to that.
Yeah, okay. And then your thoughts on how people sort of manage through this with all the uncertainty and ambiguity in the business world at the moment? Well, what would your advice be?
Well, I must say that I'm not sure that anyone has the pathway forward. Because everyone's saying, what happens now? How do we move out? What's our exit strategy? I don't think anyone actually knows what that is. But everyone wants to be part of the discussion. So even though we might not know precisely how the economy is going to recover from all this, by having the discussion now, we can actually steer the economy, steer the businesses, steer the opportunities to create the Australia of tomorrow. there's going to be some terrific legacies, I think, coming out of this. I think, never have I washed my hands so thoroughly, front and back, 20 seconds and so forth. Hand moisturiser. Sanitizer and so forth. So there's certainly that. Online shopping, I think, is going to be here. Working from home. Prior to the coronavirus, 5% of the Australian workforce had worked from home. And that was from the 2001 census to the 2016, 5% of workers. It includes a lot of farmers, of course. I think at the next census, 2021, it won't be 5%, it could be 10 or 15%. So the majority will go back to work, of course, but a far greater proportion will actually work from home going forward, which means that the home must change, the home office must change, and that's the idea of an office and a broadcast outlet, a home office broadcast outlet, the hobo concept. Or with two people working, you'd need two workspaces in the family home. So the home is very plastic, very pliable. It accommodates social and work changes in society.
Okay. Back in the 1920s, you sort of referred to this before, and we've got a slide to talk about this, but you said sort of following the carnage of World War I and the Spanish flu, the 1920s emerged as a period of great optimism.
It was a period of great optimism prior to the stock market crash, of course, in 1929. But if you look at some of the fashions, on the left there you see a well-to-do couple in London's West End in 1915, top hats and very Edwardian and very aristocratic. That was the fashion at that time. By the middle of the 1920s, just 10 years, the change in fashion, there was the casualisation of fashion. There was a looseness, a casual. We identify more with that 1925 picture. It's actually a picture of movie stars. Douglas Fairbanks, I think, and Mary Pickford, they were silent movie stars at the time. But it was like in 10 years, the society pivoted. Now, if you were to take a photograph of a fashionable person today and a fashionable person in 10 years ago, 2010, could you really tell a difference? Probably not.
Although there's probably a lot more leisure wear now.
Probably, yes, all leisure wear, I suppose. But if you were to do like evening wear, people don't wear leisure wear for evening, I don't think.
No, they don't.
But the last 10 years, we have not seen a great social shift as we saw between 1915 and 1925. So these periods can be a period of great change, and we'll see, I think, great social change coming. The home will change. Maybe we'll see a period of crazy haircuts because no one can get their hair cut in the lockdown. So we'll sort of celebrate that by having crazy hairstyles. So look for social change that will be triggered by the coronavirus.
Okay. And then I suppose one of the other questions is, like, despite government websites being the most trusted, we see that consumers are really looking to media for their information. What's the best place for the consumer to be going to get accurate information during these times? Australian?
I would suggest that. Look, I must say that if you look at Australian society at a big picture level, over the last 30 years, I would say, there has been a diminution of trust and faith in big institutions, in politics, in big business, in financial institutions, in the church, especially over the last 4 or 5 years or so. I wonder whether this might not plateau or shift. We're now placing our faith in the big institution of big government, big society, big organisation, compliance, and it will get us through the other side. And if you look at how this worked after the Second World War, we placed our faith in the big military institutions, I suppose, that delivered us victory. And we placed our faith in those institutions for 20 or 30 years. It may well be that Australians are ready to trust again the big brands, the big institutions, big government going forward. Otherwise, if you just continue that trajectory, you won't be trusting any organisation at all. I don't think that's sustainable as a society.
No, trust
You need a basis of trust to a certain degree.
Yep, agreed. Which generation do you believe will have the biggest impact post-corona and why?
Well, my line is that every generation will be impacted.
Yeah.
The baby boomers can't really go on their cruises anymore, the Rhine River cruises.
Yeah.
Their superannuation has been diminished.
Yeah.
I feel very sorry for the Generation X's.
Yeah.
I always regard them as the quiet generation. You always hear about the baby boomers and the millennials. You never hear about the X's, and yet they're slap bang in the middle, shoulder to the wheel, kids at home, mortgage, dealing with teenagers, peak of their careers.
Yeah.
They are really carrying the load at the moment. The millennials, people in their 20s and early 30s, probably have time to recover in terms of their superannuation for their retirement, but they haven't got an eye on that. I think that they'll be quite entrepreneurial. Now's the time to start a business, and I most certainly hope that they do.
Yep.
We need to celebrate and cultivate an era of entrepreneurship coming out of this. We want to create the businesses that will create the jobs for the 2020s. And I'm looking for the millennials to do that, to do the heavy lifting in that sort of entrepreneurial, creative sense.
Yeah, no pressure, millennials.
That's right.
And our final slide today is the post-corona house. And you touched on this briefly before, but
yes.
I would love for you to talk our audience through the house.
This is a slide that I have used in my presentation. I show how we lived back in the 1950s, and more or less the kind of house that I was brought up with. And then the house that we've evolved today, where you take guests past, we don't have a parlour at the front of the house, you take them down a central hallway to the kitchen family room, and you show off the bedroom by, you have all these pillows on the beds. Call it the pillowification effect. It's a measure of your sophistication as how many pillows you have on the bed as you just glimpse it going past. And then you entertain your guests out in the family room at the back, but you do the real cooking in a butler's pantry off to the side.
Yeah.
I think that what will happen post-corona is that the double garage will turn into storage and gym, because you only probably need one car if one person is working from home. I think we'll see a veggie patch out the back. Seedlings were bought, of course. Water tanks and solar power batteries. More self-sufficiency in the family home, and then the office, the home office, converting into quite a technology hub with home office broadcast opportunity, and maybe even a second workspace as well. So two people occasionally working from home can't work in the same space. I certainly do think that the Australian home is very responsive to social, cultural, economic change in Australia. That it happens very quickly. If work habits change, then the home will change as a consequence. That's good news for Officeworks and Bunnings and others, I suppose, as a consequence.
Okay. We have been inundated with questions, Bernard, so I'm going to flip across to some of these questions for our audience. So a question from Catherine. How much should a resurgence in sovereign manufacturing be driven by government versus private wealth?
Well, I would like to think that there is investment on both sides. If you look at some of the big institutions in Australia that are successful today, even like Commonwealth Serum Laboratories, CSL, it was founded as a government institution in 1916, just ahead of the Spanish flu epidemic, and it was privatised in about 1993. It's an incredibly successful business. Started as a government business. Qantas, a government business, and Telstra came out of the Postmaster General's office, a government business. Commonwealth Bank started off as a government business. An extraordinary number of very successful, very prominent, very long-standing businesses in Australia get their start with government investment. You could also point out Westpac as another example, 1817 or something like that. But I also think that there is an opportunity here for the private sector, high-end manufacturing, highly skilled manufacturing, niche. And I think that we can see this also pop up, not just in Melbourne and Sydney, but in regional centres, often associated with agribusiness. If you go to somewhere like a Dubbo or a Wagga, and often places like this, and terrific communities, I'm often taken quite aback by the extent of engineering works in those. And you think, well, probably right. If you've got headers and harvesters and people who generate their wealth from the land, you need that skill base there. How can we actually take that another step further in terms of manufacturing?
Yep.
The other point about this would be adding value, downstream value added to our agribusiness product. Rather than just producing wheat and shipping it off somewhere, can you polish it? Can you, whatever it is that needs to be done. What product is produced locally and what value can be added before it is shipped out to somewhere else in Australia? The other point is that I would make about supply chain sovereignty. I think that Australians are prepared to spend an extra $1.
Yeah, I agree.
To buy. Not everyone. If you can't afford it, that's fine. Go to the cheaper product. But if you can afford it, then you should. It's your patriotic duty to support the Australian supply chain and manufacturing capability. I'm deadly serious about that.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with you, and I would expect that the Australian community would absolutely get behind that now.
Totally, yes.
Yeah, totally agree. A question from Christopher. Australia has such a minor VC community and as such has seen a lot of entrepreneurial talent go to the US. How could this change post-COVID, and do you think it will change?
Well, VC, I think, means venture capital.
There you go.
I'm a history and geography school teacher at heart, but I think that's what this means.
Yes, it would be.
I think we are incredibly resourceful, and given the opportunity, or given the challenge, we will somehow rise to the challenge. It struck me, looking at the early days of the coronavirus, it occurred to us we didn't have masks, and we found a way to increase manufacturing capabilities in that factory in Shepparton. And then all sorts of people were coming out of left field saying, I think we can make ventilators, like a Super 8 car. I think there are car mechanics type people. I don't quite understand them. Saying, well, we can take our mechanical skill and fabricate ventilators. So this sort of lateral, pivotal, entrepreneurial attitude, you don't need mountains of capital. I'm sure that comes down the track, but we're sort of the sort of country and culture that came from an era where you could fix anything with a bit of wire. Now,
absolutely.
That's an extreme example, but I think that we can find innovative solutions to scaling up these opportunities and challenges.
So a question here around travel and tourism. So what is going to happen to travel, tourism and hospitality / events? It's dear to my heart. These areas are surely going to remain seriously challenged, perhaps for up to 2 years?
Well, it's hard to say how long this threat is going to last. But I would like to think that that this will be lifted in stages, and that in say 4 weeks' time we might be able to move freely around the state, and we might be able to assemble in 50 to 100 type events. So that might happen, and then I would imagine it would be international travel to specific considered safe destinations. So I think that's how you would unlock it. Sort of slowly, and then the tourism, travel, events industry would respond accordingly. But it won't be like opening the floodgates and saying, let's turn it on like a light switch. This is going to grow. And the sort of industry, the sort of businesses that we'll see come out of this will be leaner, more focused, more considered. Now, there's been a lot of think time, a lot of product development, a lot of consideration about the business that we're in and where we want to be. So I think it's almost like we're sort of going to shift trajectory a little bit, and the skill sets that we require, the investments we require are going to be different. I think a far more productive, an Australia with a better productivity is going to come out the other side. Okay.
There's a number of questions here around trust, and I know we touched on it a little bit, but the question is that there's been a trend in declining trust in media, government, not-for-profits and banks. Do you think that there will be a shift in this post-COVID-19? And do you think, like any of the sort of big institutions, like the banks, etc., reacted slowly or too late, or were?
No, I was quite taken aback.
Okay.
By full-page advertisements in the Australian, and I'm sure they were there in other newspapers as well, for the banks to actually identify this issue and to respond accordingly. If you look at big business in Australia, the 4 big banks, you could probably add Macquarie there as well, it really does touch middle Australia, and for them to respond in this time of need has been quite extraordinary. They've been very agile, and I think that they have done well in terms of connecting with Australians in their time of need. I'm sure there's still areas that they need to improve, as we all do. But it's almost like, for 30 years, with this slow sinking or loss of faith in these big institutions, it can't continue, and this could actually plateau or stem the flow and actually rebuild trust and faith in community, in big business, and also in government. Place your faith in the leadership of each state and the nation, and we have delivered results, the most extraordinary results, counter to my intuition that we're antsy Australians ain't going to be told. Well, actually, when we can see that bigger picture, we're happy to comply. We want to survive and thrive is the story.
Okay. I'm really mindful of time, so we'll do maybe 1 or 2 more questions, Will business continue to show empathy for customers and remain as focused on them once we return to normal? And are there examples you've seen of business taking a longer-term view of customer relationship beyond many of the short-term relief initiatives that are now in place?
I am going to use the politician's trick of using that question to give an answer that I want to give. It's kind of related. Look, you speak to any big business or big corporate and they'll say, oh, we're very, very customer-centric, customer-focused. That's what we are. And the uppermost echelons, that's what they will say, that we're very, very, the customer is at the centre of everything we do. And then you go to their website and try and call them, and you can't find a telephone number. It's like big business hides from their customers. And if you do get a telephone number to call their call centre, while you're waiting for this extraordinary amount of time, they're telling you, look, you can go on the web, you can do it this way, you can do it that way, anything to remove direct customer support. I think that there is an issue here where big corporates are saying we're customer focused, but their contact with customers is telling a different story. And I think that inconsistency will need to be ironed out over the next 10 years or so. If you have an issue with a major corporate or government department, who thinks that they can get through to someone to resolve that problem easily? It's a fight. That needs to be resolved going forward. So customer relations aren't where they need to be. There is a major shift coming, and I'm going to try and make it happen.
Excellent. So final question, I've got 2 questions for you actually. We talked a little bit before about, the increase of people working from home, sort of probably going maybe from 5% to 15, 20%, whatever that might be. Do you think that will see a shift in people moving to regional areas?
Yeah, I do. I do. In fact, if you look at the rise, the last 30 years, all about knowledge work, healthcare, education, professional services, construction, all in our capital cities, like drained youth and ambition out of regional Australia. Well, if people can work from home and workplaces are happy for people to work from home, why wouldn't you seek out a safe, secure, hygienic, sanitary, salubrious place in regional Australia and have lifestyle and work opportunity? It was Darryl Kerrigan in The Castle who said of his Bonnie Doon retreat, feel the serenity. It'll be feel the salubrity, feel the hygienicness of this place, the safety, the security, the quality of life, and I can do everything from home at this location. I think that opens up an extraordinary opportunity for Australians, not moving out to the desert areas, but maybe within a sort of 1.5 to 2 hour drive of capitals. You can get to the city if you need to, but it's simply a better mousetrap to live in these idyllic sea change, tree change, health change locations going forward.
Yeah, awesome. Final question. What's one thing that you will never take for granted again?
What I will never take for granted again, getting in the car and just going to the supermarket.
Yeah, right.
I was addicted. I regarded it as an extension of the refrigerator. It was out, we live like just, 3 minutes away. And so not being able to just do as I wanted to pick up the smallest things.
Awesome. Bernard Salt, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
It's been incredibly valuable and very, very insightful. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And next week we're going across to New Zealand, and we have Sam Johnson joining us, who is a farm boy turned social entrepreneur. So look forward to catching up with everybody again next week. Take care and stay safe.